Our good friend Mike McAllister joining us here on the program. Mike, always great chatting with you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I've been called worse than Meatloaf, so that's okay.
I think it was a compliment, though, certainly.
In a weird way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a compliment. All right, let's start. We'll get into lacrosse here in a second, but let's start with football. And big news over the weekend. Highly touted wide receiver signed by Fran Brown, gets a verbal commitment anyway. Tell us about this young man and why it's such a big deal.
Yeah, Amari Goff is his name. He's from Virginia. He is a four-star prospect, rated in the top 250 players overall. So, I know Fran Brown has a reputation of being a great recruiter, and Syracuse recruiting class was in the top 10 before this, but they had a couple of four-stars in the class. Now he becomes your third four-star in the class, and the more of those you start stacking up, it just shows you the level of talent is improving as far as what Fran Brown is bringing in. And we know what he's done in the portal, but he said numerous times that high school recruiting is going to be the foundation of the program he wants to build. So as they're doing so with high-profile recruits, and even honestly some of the three-stars that they've gotten are highly rated three-stars, kind of just bordering on four-star, and ones that several other Power 4 schools were after. They're still after a five-star wide receiver, Calvin Russell. So it's just one more piece of evidence that Fran Brown is just an elite-level recruiter, and I don't know that there's anyone else like him in the country.
Mike, for us people like myself that don't follow recruiting as tightly as you do, you say the 250 best player. We know in basketball, if you get a top 50 player, that's a stud. What is that in football terms? What would you say is a great recruit in football?
So take like the top 300 or so in football and equate that to like the top 100 in basketball, kind of. Those are kind of your elite level, top of the line guys. If you want to say like top 50, you're probably like top 200 or so to get that real high end type of player. He's ranked 213, so he's kind of just outside of that. So he might be, basketball recruiting wise, somewhere in the 50 to 55 range, just outside of that top 50, but still big time prospect, someone you expect that's going to be able to, has the potential to make an impact right away, but at least within a couple of years is going to be someone that you're going to be relying on. Is going to be a big time player for you.
Yeah, this is a new world in football for us. So we're all learning. So you're our educator, our guru.
I'll do my best.
Mike, are there any other names at the moment that we should be looking out for? Or anybody's got a visit lined up that we should be watching out for?
Well, they've got a bunch of official visits that are going to be starting the last weekend in May and then going into June. There's, I think a dozen to 24 or so players that are going to be visiting. So it'd be tough to go through all the names. But one name that I'll bring to your attention is Brady Owens. He's a three-star tight end who is also from Virginia that had an in-home visit with tight ends coach Michael Johnson on Friday and is scheduled to visit Syracuse in the middle of June, following visits to Rutgers and Florida State. So he's someone Syracuse has been on for a while, and they've been recruiting extremely hard, and he's going to be up on campus in the middle of June. And as of right now, they have the last scheduled official visit, and then he's planning to go into decision-making mode and hoping to make a decision by sometime in July.
All right. What about basketball? Things have been quiet on the transfer portal front, and I think we all know why, right? I mean, it seems like they've doled out the meaningful minutes, and that they feel good about where they are right now. Do you anticipate some movement at all, though, in the portal for Adrian Autry and his team?
I mean, I was leaning towards yes, but then the fact that they announced the players that they did, is that being done because they're basically done? I don't know that for sure. It could also mean that they're looking towards international players or junior college players to fill up the last couple of spots of the roster. The problem is, at this juncture, if you're trying to grab somebody for the back end of your roster, it's tough to do so with someone that is good enough to play at a power conference school, because those players are looking for playing time. And Syracuse is pretty crowded at almost every position at this point. And it would be tough, I think, to convince someone that there are meaningful minutes available. That doesn't mean it's not possible. It doesn't mean you can't do it. But that's certainly a challenge that Syracuse is going to have at this juncture if they're looking to fill out that roster through the transfer portal.
Are they also kind of in a weird position, too, because they don't know how many scholarships they have? Because it could be 15, it could be 12, 13?
That's also part of it. If it's 12, 13, and they're basically done, right?
Yeah.
If it's 15, then they can add a couple of more. So that whole situation with the house settlement is impacting a variety of sports in a variety of ways, and certainly scholarship allocation is one of them.
All right, let's talk a little lacrosse, and I'm sure you had a chance to watch yesterday. We haven't mentioned the women yet, but their season comes to an end over the weekend in a one-goal heartbreaker to Yale. The men pick up just a heart-stopping finish, right? And they rally from down 8-2 at the half to win and advance past Harvard. Let's start with the women's game first, I guess. And it just didn't seem to be SU season. They played a lot of close games against a lot of really good teams, and they just seem to come up just a little bit short time and time again.
Yeah, no doubt. And, then towards the end of the season, they kind of started playing their worst lacrosse of the year. We think about that blowout to Boston College that wasn't even really competitive, to be honest with you. And that's, you kind of felt like going into the NCAA tournament, the way that the bracket laid out was that they had a shot to get to the quarters, but then they got to play that Boston College team again. And Boston College, frankly, has had their number ever since Kayla Traynor got there. So I don't think she's beaten them even once. So that was going to be a tough draw regardless. But, like you said, from the injury to Olivia Adamson early in the season to just kind of the way things played out, it just never seemed to fully click with this team. That said, they were in that game. They had a 7-4 lead. Looked like they were the better team for a vast majority of it. And then there were just kind of some strange situations. There was a penalty they called on Yale that would have had their best player ejected, and then they reviewed it, and instead of upholding that, they overturned it and called an embellishment penalty on Syracuse, which I can't ever remember seeing that called in women's lacrosse, and Yale took advantage and scored 3 or 4 straight goals and basically took control of the game. Then there was a review process at one point when the game was tied that took almost 20 minutes of real time to get a review done on something that seemed pretty simple. And a lot of it had to do with shot clock. There were clips of the officials yelling at each other. I mean, it was just a very bizarre game from basically the second half on. And, ultimately Syracuse got a point-blank shot down by 1 right in front of the net, and instead of getting it on cage, the shot hit a Yale defender, and that pretty much ended the game. So unfortunate way for them to end it. Certainly a bizarre series of events there at one point, but kind of encapsulates the whole season, I think.
All right, let's move on to the men now. And I guess, did you give up hope at all for Syracuse in that game? And if so, when was that?
Yeah, I gave up hope when it was 7-1. I just said, they're done. They just didn't look like they had the energy and the sense of desperation, the sense of urgency that you need in an NCAA tournament game where it's win or go home. It just seemed like they rolled into it like it was ho-hum, random regular season game against a team that they thought they could just walk out there and blow out. And that's the way it felt basically for the entire first half, whereas Harvard seemed like the team that was desperate, extra motivated, et cetera, and it was a little bit discouraging. They seemed unorganized on offense. McCool wasn't making very many saves. Seemed like when they did get a stop, they couldn't clear it. Everything was going wrong. And then at some point, midway through the third quarter, everything clicked. And with the domination they had at the face-off X, it just felt like as Syracuse's offense got in a rhythm that they had the potential to just rally off 5, 6, 7 goals in a row pretty quickly, and that's exactly what they did. Little disappointed they couldn't close it out in regulation and had to go to overtime, but either way, still a pretty thrilling win, an all-time classic in Syracuse, and they give themselves a shot to end the championship weekend-less streak that they've had going on for about 12 years now.
Had they not come back and won that game, Mike, what would we be talking about today as it pertains to lacrosse? Would we be talking about potential changes, or would we just be talking about what a disappointing season it was?
Well, you'd certainly be talking about the disappointing season. As far as the changes in the coaching staff, I don't think that's something that would have been done, to be honest with you. But I do think that there would have been a certain portion of the fan base that would have been asking those questions or making those comments for sure.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I don't think anything would have happened to the staff. But, as we saw during the basketball season, I think there certainly would have been some chatter from some of the fan base about what's going on here. How do they keep coming up short? But we don't have to have that conversation. Syracuse is moving on, and now they get Princeton in the national quarterfinals with a spot in the Final Four on the line. I said to Paulie earlier in the show that I feel like that they might be able to use this to kind of take some of the pressure off, right? They're playing with house money to some degree. They were dead and buried. They came back. They won. Now they're playing a team that's higher, a higher seed than them. Do you feel like they can go in next weekend and play a little bit looser than maybe they played yesterday early on?
I think they can play looser, but I think they have to bring that same level of urgency and desperation that we saw when they were down, 6-7 goals, whatever it was, midway through the third quarter. From that point on, they played like their hair was on fire. Like, hey, we're getting back to championship weekend. We're turning this around. We're getting back to what Syracuse lacrosse should be. They played with that level of, enthusiasm, of energy. They have to bring that right away. They can't wait until midway through the third quarter to do that against Princeton. Princeton's better than Harvard. I wouldn't say leaps and bounds better, because I think Harvard is a good team, but I don't think you can play around with that again in a quarterfinal situation. So, Harvard's really good, Princeton's really good. I think coming into the season, most thought that Syracuse was the better, more talented team. They might have more talent top to bottom, but it's going to be whoever plays the best on Saturday.
Yeah, we saw that in the regular season finale too against North Carolina, right? The playing with the sense of urgency that they got down, and then they all of a sudden turned it on, and the comeback came up just short. But they look like a different team when they flip that switch. And as you said, they got to have that switch has to be flipped from the opening faceoff next weekend.
Yeah, if they play like that for an entire game, honestly, they can win the national championship. There's no one that I think when everyone is playing at that level, at their complete max, I think Syracuse is the best team in the country, especially with the way they can dominate the face-off with John Mullen. So if they play that way for the entire game, all four quarters, I know it's a cliche, but if they play that way for all four quarters against Princeton, I think they'll be going back to championship weekend for the first time in over a decade. And if they play that way at championship weekend, we could see the first title here in quite some time as well.
Yeah, we saw them play like that at the ACC tournament. They went down there with some urgency, and they played like that against Notre Dame and Duke, and came away with a couple of wins. Yeah, they're looking for their first title since 2009. It's been it's hard to believe that it's been that long, but we'll see if they can. First things first, right? They got to get to the Final Four, and a game on Saturday against Princeton with the right to advance on a championship weekend. Mike, as always, we appreciate the time, great insight, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, Mike McAllister with us here on the show. And with that, we'll open up the phone lines for the next segment, 315-437-7644 if you'd like to check in. Quick break here. Back after this on ESPN Radio.